think something is getting lost in translation.
We don't have time to discuss Bill Murray films right now, Fib. Oh, do you mean like there's no direct match in their language?
Correct.
Yeah, that would make sense. Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett. If you've never listened to the show before, hey, welcome. You know what? You should subscribe. In addition to providing entertaining and informative photography-related information, I also go on adventures with the crew of the Starship Fibonacci, if, you're into that sort of thing. Right now, I'm trying to document a previously undiscovered culture on the planet Xanadu 2, but they only speak in a series of roller skate squeaks. On a related note, on this episode of the podcast, I'm talking with pilot/photographer Matt Jacob, or as he's known on the socials, Matty J, about his photographic journey capturing cultural portraits. That conversation after the break. Have you tried giving it a more oily sound? Are you ready to take your photography business to new heights? Look no further than PicTime, the ultimate solution for photographers who demand more. Wow your clients with stunning branded galleries that showcase your work like never before. Let your customers preview selected photos on an array of printed goods. PicTime's smart photo store ensures your art shines on everything from canvases to coffee mugs. And take the stress out of marketing with PicTime's automation tools that empower you to effortlessly connect with clients, leaving you more time to focus on your craft. And revolutionize your workflow with PicTime's cutting-edge AI tool that allows you to search and sort images effortlessly, saving you time and ensuring you find that perfect shot in seconds. And that helps you strengthen vendor relationships with precision, curate vendor galleries, sending them just the right images, and enhancing your professional connections. Worried about switching hosts? Fear not. The expert staff at PicTime can seamlessly migrate your photos, making the transition smooth and stress-free. So are you ready to transform your photography experience? Visit nerdyphotographer.com/recommends/PicTime today and discover a world where creativity meets efficiency. Hey everyone, just a heads up. There are a few points during this interview where Matt's audio cuts out or buffers a little bit. It doesn't take away from the conversation, but I just wanted to give you a heads up ahead of time. It's not an issue with your podcast platform. All right, without further ado. Hello and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett. I am here today with Matty J, Matt Jacobs. Welcome, Matt. Do you prefer?
Thanks very much.
Do you prefer Matt, Matty? I should have asked this beforehand.
Matt is fine. I just used Matty for social media, I guess, because Matt wasn't available. So some people call me Matty, but Matt is my normal kind of nickname.
Just to be clear. All right. So before we get into our conversation, we're going to roll the dice breaker, and it's an 8, and that gives us. What's something that's really important to you that your peers might not know about that you haven't talked about?
Animal welfare, I think, is extremely important to me, or growing in its importance to me. And I don't really talk about it with my friends that much, mostly because my friends don't seem to care that much about animal welfare. And we talk about, I guess, a lot of other things. But, as I've got older, we've kind of gathered more and more pets. And, we've always been very fond of animals. But now, living where we live now in Bali, where animals kind of suffer a little bit just because of the numbers that there are in the streets, it's certainly opened my eyes a lot more, and we have a lot more involvement now with things like that. So we've also kind of gone down the road of becoming vegetarians because of it. So that kind of subject, animal welfare and things, is now very close to my heart. But it's something that I guess not many people know about. So there you go. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have a lot of similar feelings. My dog. I saw your post and your stories with your dog. At least one of them. I don't know how many you have. And it made me think about my own dog, who's a rescue from St. Martin in the Caribbean, and she was found with
Oh,
her
wow.
litter after a hurricane. And like dogs
Yeah.
dogs in the Caribbean don't tend to last very long. They just live
No.
on the streets, and they maybe live a couple of years. She's 6 years old, and going strong. And people always say like, you guys gonna get her a friend?" And we're like, she's mostly border collie, and so she's like, no friend necessary.
She doesn't need a friend.
No,
Yeah.
she needs a job.
You're her friend. You're her best friend, I'm
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, it's just like, what are we doing? Where are we going? Let's go for another hike. Let's get out of the house. Yeah. So kind of going from that, like, this is something we share in common, but for people who don't know your journey in photography, could you give people a quick introduction to you and like how you got started in photography?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was more of an organic process than it was any hard decision, which I think is very common with photographers. They kind of fall into it as a hobby, and then if they really love it, they learn to be better, and then when they get better, they think about going professional, and then you fall out of love with it. But I'm kind of still in that. I'm desperate not to go really like full-time photography and try and diversify as much, but I guess we could come on to that a bit later. So I fell into it just through travel. So my first career was a pilot. So I used to have the huge privilege and luxury of being able to travel for free, essentially. Now it wasn't as glamorous as it used to be. So I work in the private sector, so we managed to always have some downtime and go to some weird and wonderful places. And that kind of really opened my eyes to cultural differences. And at that time, there was no social media, or social media was just starting. There was no like real instant way for me to tell my experience or the stories of these people. And there was something in me that wanted to. I can't explain it. It was maybe a bit of narcissism. Oh, look at me, I'm in this place. But there was also just like, hey guys, there are these amazing cultures that no one's ever heard about, and these amazing places that no one doesn't go on to the tourism boards and the travel agencies. There's so many amazing places out there that I didn't know about, and I've been very fortunate to have my eyes opened. Now I want to help open other people's eyes to these places, and the camera was just a thing that certainly I thought would allow me to do that. And being a kind of a bit of a techno geek, I love gadgets. I love toys. I love cameras. I love buttons. One reason I came a pilot is because I could just press a load of buttons. So the camera was like a really good kind of middle ground for that. And that was it. Like I didn't have any idea what I was doing at all, just like most people who start out. And as I realized how bad I was, it drove me to become better. And so then I started to go on. Even back then, there wasn't really YouTube for self-learning, but there were workshops, and there were conferences, and there were webinars and stuff like that, and of course books. So all of that kind of combined together. Yeah, remember books?
Yeah.
All of that combined together, I learned through my every kind of minute of my spare time was like, how do I shoot like this guy, or how do I create an iconic portrait, which is the pursuit that certainly I am in portrait genre, is the pursuit I'm having all the time. So that was it. And then I went on a couple of workshops, and one of those workshops took my level from extremely basic to, I guess, somewhere intermediate, just through literally like a couple of 10-minute lessons about light. And that was it. I was on my way. I was like, I get it now. Something clicked. And that was it. That was, yeah.
It's interesting to see how different people, there's that moment. Like when it had been a hobby for me. I moved to New York City to be an actor, and I was photographing other actors as kind of a side gig and doing headshots and bands and things like that. But there's this moment when it's sort of, I was a physics major originally when I like started out in college. So like the scientific part of it, and like when you said I'm a techno geek and whatever, I was just like pushing buttons. You're on the right podcast, because It's like half of my stuff that I put on the website as well as like DIY stuff. Like I just want to build a thing that'll do the thing that I want to do, but nobody makes that thing. But yeah, there's that in interviewing people. There's a different, I don't know, moment of clarity, catalyst, whatever word that you want to use for it, like what that people have that just kind of, I don't know, it takes each different person a longer period or a different amount of time to reach that, and it's in whatever it is, everyone has their own aha moment to sort of like take them to a different place from just like, and sometimes it's just the desire to just not do this as like, I'm just going to point and put everything on auto and I want to know a little bit more about this. And that, yeah, it's a finding out. Like, part of my joy is finding out everybody's different story and what that is. I don't know.
Sometimes it's on the business level as well. I mean, I speak to a lot of guys where, I mean, photography does come first, but they're so interested in making as much money out of it as possible, where they do something and then that's their click. It's like, oh wow, I can actually make decent money out of this. And so, okay, the philosophy and the kind of the ethics of that aside, that is their moment of, so everyone does have a completely different story and a different kind of output from that. But you know, most people don't, they start as a hobby, right? They start in their spare time. No one, not that I know of, goes, well, I'm going to be a photographer tomorrow. And they just go all in full time to learn it. And then off they go. That just doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean,
so everyone has their own pace.
There's a certain amount of enjoyment. And I actually just mentioned this on another interview. We were talking about how like, you don't have to do this as a job. If you really enjoy it, you don't necessarily have to, like, just because some people, it ruins the passion for them to like turn it into a job. It's just like, then all of the business stuff comes into it and you're just like, I don't enjoy picking up my camera anymore. And I've been doing this for 25 years. And it's like, I have to tell people like every 5 years, there's sort of I feel like the cycle comes around and I'm sort of sitting there going like, do I still enjoy doing this?
It's like marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with my wife, we always just sit there and like, there's sort of an affirmation every day. Like, yeah, we made the right decision. And I should probably do that more with the photography. I think, but I come around every time, like I have that serious conversation with myself, like, is this it? I'm like, yeah, I really enjoy this. And then I find the things that I don't enjoy and find out if there are ways that I can lessen those and outsource that to someone else or do things. But
I think that's absolutely key. And that does come with a bit of maturity through just doing it for so long, right? You figure out, okay, why am I doing this if I don't really like it? And then if I can get rid of that, or like you said, delegate to someone else, I think that's absolutely vital to maintaining that passion. I think that's what everyone's scared about. And I see a lot of people becoming dispassionate with it before they even know it, right? They go so like, oh, yeah, I'll do this. They say yes to everything. Before you know it, they're committed into this maze of isn't really photography anymore, and they're accepting jobs they don't really want to do, and they're doing things they're not really that passionate about, and they just become either burnt out or miserable.
Yeah, I see a lot of like
it is stunning.
A lot of like 5-year people. It's gotten, and I used to see it a little bit, but like now I feel like as digital has become more of a thing, and I think probably in the last 10 years, it's more of that very fast arc of like, I'm going to get into this professionally, I'm going to make money or whatever, and then I'm just going to take every job I can get, and then they sort of like they it's the brightest star burns out the fastest. I mean, there's no plan for expansion. It's a whole other conversation to have. There's no scalability thoughts in there. It's just like, I'm just going to take everything I can, and then I burn out, and then I'm on to my next thing. I'm going to figure out something else. I think that if people really want to have a lasting career in photography, I think you really do need to sort of sit down and have other conversations with yourself other than, I want to make as much money as I can as fast as possible. Because there's a whole thing of like saying, like you said, saying yes to every job that comes across. Like that was one of the biggest lessons I ever learned, was to just learn to say no. To like figuring out the jobs that were just wrong for me. Like I was not the person that they were looking for, because as opposed to like sitting there thinking, I need the money, thinking, wait, I'm not the right person for what they want. And then if you do that, like you end up taking those jobs that you're not right for, and like you're saying, not passionate about in some way, then you start resenting yourself, and you resent your client, because you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be doing this. You resent the job. And your clients aren't going to be happy because most likely you're not giving them really what they want.
The power of saying no, and the analogy with photography is well, there's a few. It's what you keep out of your frame when you're composing something, right? That's such a huge decision. It's not what you put in the frame. It's the 95% of everything outside of that frame that you're not including. And just like when you're editing or putting a series together, curate it. I find it still so difficult. It's like, well, I love that photo and I love that photo, but I've got to choose between, I've got to take 10 out of a series of 200 or whatever if you're a digital photographer. So, the analogy is the power of saying no and being strict with that, and for the right reasons with the right intent is life-changing, I think.
Intention is such a huge part of it. And like, it was one of the things I try to tell any photographer. It doesn't matter what stage of their career they're at, when they're like, okay, well, I'm having trouble with figuring this out. The exercise I always tell people to take is, I started out shooting film. I like, choose whether you're shooting a 24 or 36 roll exposure, and you have to do your entire shoot with only that many exposures. Like, tell your story in this numbers, because you get real intentional really fast. And like, it's a project I've given myself for this year, is every month I'm going out on one of my hikes with my dog, and I'm taking a roll of film, and different lens each time, only one lens. I'm only shooting 24 or 36 exposures the entire time. Like, each month it's going to be a different thing. So we'll see how's it going? It's going great so far. And there's a whole other connection to it. And it's all film that I found in my parents' house after they passed away. It's all like just like unused rolls of film. So it's like, there's connections there, and it's just it's a lot of stuff about.
Is the film still in good condition?
I mean, it was all unopened and in the basement where it was cool. So it wasn't like in a warm place. So we'll see. I mean, again, like, who knows? I don't know who knows. I'm going to start developing.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. Some of it, we'll see what happens. So if it doesn't come out, doesn't come out. Maybe I'll start shooting 2 rolls every month. Maybe one will be a new roll of film and one will be an old roll of film. We'll adjust accordingly. But it's funny, like, when you were talking about like the original reasons for getting into like photographing these places, like there was no social media, and you kind of wanted to tell people about the cultures or whatever you were seeing, and you was like, oh, maybe it's narcissism. It's really interesting, because looking at it from looking through your portfolio and things now, that is not at all. I don't get that sense. Like, I know kind of what you're saying. I was like, oh, look at this place. This place is gorgeous. Like, when I travel, I'm always like, people should see this. This is because my wife and I always look for things that are not in the tourist book either, and like trying to find things that we're huge history buffs, so we find like historical significance of things, and like learn the history of a location, as opposed to like just going in there and being like, wow, this is pretty. But like, looking at your work, there is an appreciation for the cultures that you're photographing that someone who's just sort of being narcissistic about it would not come across. There is a care and a concern, I guess maybe would be one word. I'm thinking the word for the people that you're photographing, that really comes through in the images. And I think that if you're being selfish about it, you can't make that connection. Like, that's just my opinion from looking at your work. Just I don't know how you like how. I guess we'll get to a question here. When you're choosing these subjects, I mean, I don't know if like tell our listeners more about like, how do you choose your subjects for a project? Is it based on where you're going to be? I know that's how you kind of said as a pilot. That's kind of how it started. But is that now how you choose, or do you like do more of a planning process to like pick what project is going to be? Or how do you choose? I guess is the more direct question.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to clarify the narcissism thing. I think back kind of 10, 15, well, crikey, nearly 15 years ago now, the desire for me to show people what I'm doing. Hey, look at me. I'm in this amazing place. That was me kind of mid-20s, like a lot of mid-20s are today, but they have Instagram and they end up being influencers, right? It's just this kind of this cycle that we go through, which hopefully will be ending one day. But yeah, in terms of, so now that there is still that constant battle I have, even when I'm on location, even if I'm in the studio, but if we're talking about kind of my major portfolio images, there is still that. I just came back from India, Varanasi, with actually a client who wanted to to learn a little bit more about kind of my techniques on location. And there's always that battle of, well, no, I want to get my shots. Or if you're on your own and you are the photographer with, these amazing people, whether they're indigenous to the land that you're in, or they're a subculture or any type of person, right? And you're kind of almost in the crudest sense stealing their time. There is still part of me goes, well, fuck that. I want to get, excuse my language.
Oh, no worries. You can swear as much as you want.
Okay. There's still part of me like, I want to get the best photo I can, and I don't care. That's kind of the devil on your shoulder in the back of your mind. And I think we all have that as photographers. So it's that constant battle of like, well, no, this is not about me. This is a collab, especially if you're portrait photographer. This is a collaboration. And to answer your question, it comes from respect. Actually, it comes from respect and curiosity of that culture, of that person. And so how I choose them, it's not really choice. It's a lot of it's just opportunities for a certain location or a certain a project that might be brought my way. Or it's just through education. I read, I listen, huge on podcasts. So I listen to a wide array of podcasts and just keep up with. I don't really read the news anymore. Again, that's probably a whole other podcast we can talk about in terms of media. Yeah. And I don't really care about that. I care a lot about education and educating myself. So I will, I don't really travel with piloting anymore thinking, okay, like I need to think about going to this place with a camera. Because most of my travel now with being a pilot is cities. And so, I mentioned to you earlier, I'm coming to New York next week. It's like, well, I still take my camera out every day and try and be a better street photographer because I just enjoy photography, but I won't think about that as a project. So now I live in Indonesia, educating myself more and more about Indonesia, which I thought I was before I moved. Now I've moved. It's like, okay, I knew nothing about this place. Now I'm starting to know more and more. So as I have that curiosity, as I educate myself, I garner more curiosity and I want to find out more about that. And I want to go and see that. And I want to go and see that. So really it's just, which I promote through a lot of things, but just self-education and just wanting to inform myself of what am I missing out on? What is out there that I don't know about? And if I think I know about it, I probably don't know about it. So the only way to really know about it is to go and experience it, go and see it in person. And then I'll decide like, okay, this might make for a cool photography series. And I don't do many projects throughout the year. I do 3 or 4 big projects that take my fancy or have real curiosity in that I've been planning for a while or that I've already visited once or twice because I can't just go there and take my camera out. That's not the way it works. It's a lot of research, a lot of planning, and then it's going to do a recce. It's going to meet the people, see if, maybe they're just not the type of people that want their photograph taken, in which case you're not going to get a very good story out of it. Right. So there's a lot of, 90% of it is just research and planning. And then it's the fun part of going to take the shots.
I think that's like one of the, whatever you do in life, I think curiosity is an essential element to feeling like you fulfilled. For one thing, like I so many people I feel like are not curious enough. And like I said, the curiosity, respect, and logistics, I think, are like basically what you kind of outlined there is the major elements of that. And it really comes across in your work. Um, I think the curiosity for the people and the culture, and I feel like I want to learn more about other people, other cultures. That's always a thing. Here's a very funny story. I was in Scotland 3 years ago for my anniversary, and my wife and I decided. Well, she got it for me as our anniversary and my birthday are very close to one another, and she got me a raptor experience, which was, like meeting different. The guy shows up, we meet different birds of prey. There's a hawk and
Mhm.
owls, and he's got a falcon, but he brought out an eagle, and he's there, and he's talking to us about it. And he goes, "Oh yeah, in Mongolia, they actually use eagles to, for hunting." And I was like, "Oh really?" And he pulled up. He's like, "Oh, here's some photos from like this really like," and I no idea at the time, but like when I was looking at your portfolio, I was like, "Oh, those are the photos that
Mm.
that guy was showing me
Oh,
from
right.
from your project with the guys who were like, with the Eagles." I don't know if you had the chance. I'm sure, like you're saying, being respectful. If you ever had one land on you or while you were doing that project, are you still there, Matt?
No, I didn't. I didn't want to kind of. Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. I didn't get one landing, but not so much out of the respect, because it's not a problem for them to kind of train the eagle to land on your hand. A few of the people I'm with did. I was just a bit scared. Scared. I mean, these eagles were
They're
massive, and their
huge.
talons were so big. I was like, I don't like. They're beautiful, and I love them, but I don't need to have one landing on me. I'd rather try and take a photo of them. So, yeah, no, I didn't. I did, but that was a very, very special. I mean, that's a great example, because something for us that might be not everyday life is kind of like a day out, and they're kind of these beautiful animals for our enjoyment. And then you kind of travel across the other side of the world, and these same animals are used completely differently.
Yeah.
And they're parts of, they live in the homes of these Mongolian nomads. They're part of the family, and they help hunt foxes and rabbits and things like that. It's just I mean, you look at everyday things, and that's the beauty of photography. It really does, so many cliches flying around here, but it really does kind of change your perspective of things when you're looking through that lens. You start looking at everyday thing. That's really where curiosity for me is born from, because look at some other human across the other side of the street. They don't have to be the other side of the world, just be in the same town that you live in. And you just think, how do you live your life?
Right.
What is going through your mind? Your perceptions on things be so different. And so that, again, that garners not only curiosity, but respect for other people and other people's perceptions on life. They're bringing a completely different context, completely different background, completely different culture, hundreds and hundreds, sometimes thousands of years of ancestral history into their practices and their cultures. And so I just find it interesting. I mean, I think to put it bluntly, it's like you're a historian. It's like reading a book on Genghis slaughtered millions and millions of people. We can't do anything about it. It's an interesting story for us to read about and hopefully learn from.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I completely understand what you're saying. Like the perspective changes. You get a sense of how someone else lives, and that's always like, for me when I'm traveling, there is really this sense of I want to learn. I don't want to hang out in the touristy places. I want to hang out with the locals, and I want to like kind of learn more about them, and not in the sense of like I'm so that people think I'm a local. It's that I want to understand how life is lived here and how different
Yeah.
things are. I will say, did have the eagle land on my arm sometimes. It's like a helicopter landing on you. It was
Is it?
so they're so huge. It's so huge. My wife took some pictures while it was crazy. Also, there was a moment when the handler, these are all his birds that he's rescued or like in some way, but he had his hawk out and he was like, "Oh, can you do a favor for me and like put your hands over your head in like a hoop?" And I was like, "I don't know." He's like, "No, just do it." And I did it, and I felt like the talons like drag over the top of my head as the hawk like went through my arms and just like in a split second. Um, yeah, there is,
What?
it is a mind bending moment to like see how this fairly large looking animal, like the hawk on your hand, it's light, it's a pound, 2 pounds, whatever that eagle weighs is like lifting a statue or something. Anyway, never mind. We'll move on from that. But I just thought it was really funny that years later now I'm like, oh yeah, I remember those photos. So
That is
in
funny.
in your opinion, what role? I mean, we've talked about like showing different cultures and being curious and understanding how people live in these different cultures. What role does photography play in shaping cultural understanding and empathy, on a global scale?
Well, I still impact of being on a global scale. I worry that photography is not in its demise. It's changing a lot, or at least the impact of it has changed a lot. And people, because it's so saturated, right, in terms of not only photography but amateur and iPhone photography, and everyone's got a camera on their hand, and now we have TikTok and Instagram and all the things to compete against, which now just kind of puts photography in a room where we have to punch out and we have to kind of fight even harder for photography to have a voice. And within that, each artist to have their own voice. So I think the role of photography is all changing, but the common denominator with it is we have the power to provide awareness. We tell stories in a much more visceral way, with images rather than with just copy and with text, right? So I still think that we have to, I think photography can really have such a huge impact with education, with awareness, and with conversation. And I think, the other beauty of podcasts, but a photography podcast, wonderful, because we can converse and we can have discourse surrounding whatever it is. In this case, we're talking about people and other people's lives, wherever they might live. That then allows people to think, right? And I just feel like so many people don't have that trigger to think and to be aware of how other people live. That could be your next door neighbor.
Yeah. It's such a
could be. We're seeing much more of a polarity, certainly in the West, where let's take a look at this photographer and how he showcases the story of whatever. It might be homeless on the streets of New York. It might be an endemic drug issue. It might be something closer to home. It might be something the other side of the world. We can get in mind of education, some kind of awareness, which will for society to be healthy, or at least to be, at least help for society to become healthier, because it sparks interest, sparks curiosity, sparks education, and sparks conversation. I think all of that can only be good for individuals, but also in this tribal kind of world that we're living in these days, it can only be good for that. Unfortunately, it gets then put on ridiculous platforms that just are echo chambers and illusory truth mechanisms, which just ruin the concept of photography in general. And then obviously we've got AI and stuff. So the world is ending, but at least our photography can still have a voice, can have some kind of power and some kind of role within that.
Yeah,
in my opinion, anyway.
I understand what you're saying. I agree that there's we're battling uphill in the sense of like, against algorithms and people's sort of curated experiences on social media platforms and where they get their media from wherever it is. And there's just sort of like, I hearken back to days when, I don't know, like if it really was a more of a golden age, or maybe that's just the uh, I don't know, my being old and thinking things were better. Um, More of it in the post truth era.
You were saying how your kind of old age mentality, which I've had for many years, how
Yeah.
harping back how things seem to be better back then.
Well, they seem to be better, but I don't know that they actually were. But it's sort of like this. There was a sense of when you're getting those images, when you used to like open a newspaper and see the photos of and read a story, you felt that there was an objectiveness there. And maybe it's because I am older and before the sort of like commercialization of news in that sense of like news outlets, which in the last 20 years is just like it's out of control. There used to be, I don't know how to explain to people who didn't really experience it as an adult, because I was an adult then, and like looking at things and going like, okay, you could read. Obviously, there was an editorial bent to whatever the outlet was, but you at least had. I was a journalist. Um, One of my degrees was in journalism, and I did photojournalism when I, was also like in my getting started time. And there are certain precepts to like you're telling the facts. So there are certain things like where, what, the who, what, where, why, and when of things. Like there just seemed to be much more of a, I don't know, truth, factual basis for telling the stories. Whereas now it's like we've got a 24-hour news cycle and we just got to keep things going. And 90% of what we're doing is actually just commenting on what's happened as opposed to doing things. So in that sense of like, yeah, we're fighting as photographers to kind of maintain that space for photography and images and AI. Like there were two accounts on Instagram that I was following that I didn't realize were AI for a while. Like it took me a month. And I have a pretty critical eye, and I showed them to my wife, and she was just like, and she's also got a very critical eye, and she was like, okay, that's crazy. And I said, yeah, this is the worst it's going to be from now on. Like that's the thing that I always try to tell like people who are like, oh, it's no big deal and whatever. And they always like to show like, oh, photographers are always going to have a job. And they're like, because AI is like, can't do the hands. And I'm like, eventually it might be able to do the hands. Who knows? There are things that
eventually it's definitely going to be able to do the hands.
Right. Like this is the worst that it is. It doesn't get, it doesn't stop getting better from here. It doesn't take a step backwards or just like remain here. It keeps growing unless hopefully with some of the lawsuits that are going on, they might be able to reset some of the data sets for some of these bigger, like more powerful and dare I say like creepy things that you can get out of them. Like
they are creepy, aren't they?
Yeah. There was this guy who was a fashion photographer who like said he was a fashion photographer. And like I said, I was for a month was looking at that going like, oh, he's pretty avant-garde. Like these are some pretty great things. And then all of a sudden there were these very noticeably AI images in his feed. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And then I started going back and going, oh, all of his photos had like a hashtag that said AI art on them. I just didn't see it because of his captioning and whatever. And I was like, oh, okay. But it makes me worry about the fields of like photojournalism and people just not being media literate enough or curious enough to find out. Like, again, we come back to what we were talking about before with curiosity. People are not curious enough to challenge whether something is real or not. They, like you had mentioned before, the echo chamber of social media, where they're just like getting you're just hearing or seeing what you wanted to see and not questioning it because
Well, and then they're not wanting to spend more than 30, 60 seconds maximum on one piece of content, right?
right.
So, I don't necessarily blame us for this. I think we have a lot to do into kind of breaking through that mold and that conditioning that the algorithms have given us. But I think it's most of the blame obviously lies on these huge conglomerates and these huge corporations that have just brainwashed the way we not only think but the way we get our information, right? So this comes into photography because actually I'm kind of in the middle ground when it comes to AI, and I think there are some genres of photography that will unfortunately die. Photojournalism, I don't think, but they just have a much tougher battle to be able to show what's real and fight misinformation and disinformation. I think, like product photography, right?
It's
Product
gone.
photography,
It's
even fashion photography. These guys are going to lose their jobs, but people lost their jobs when film went to digital, or when digital photography came out. Sorry, not when film went to digital. But so there are kind of tugs and pushes, and as we evolve, but there is an argument to say that photography will become a real, authentic photography will become more valuable.
Yeah.
The more AI takes hold of the whatever they want to call it, promptography, or images that are developed artificially, in an artistic sense, I think photography will have a more valuable place. That is if that's conditional upon these big companies and on something like that, or you're able to authenticate easily, or there's a badge of authentication or whatever it is. So people are able to discern between a real and fake image. Essentially, that's what we're all after.
Yeah.
I think they both have their places, but I think real images, if they're proven to be real, that's a big if, right? I don't know how that's going to be formulated, but I think real images, if they're proven to be real, will become more valuable because it's just going to have a lesser part of the market.
Well, it's an interesting thing, like thought as like a thought question. Will there be a kind of a backlash against artificial images? And it's interesting, like when we get your feed your pictures into this AI and let it show you what you look like, blah blah blah, whatever. And I think most people don't realize that when they do that, they are giving them their face or whatever to use in future data sets to create images. That's a very scary part of it that I don't think most people get, which is why I don't use them. But there's also is interesting. I was having on a few episodes ago on the podcast, we're talking about the print, like the importance of prints in the digital world. And my guest was talking about how for people of our generation, we kind of grew up with, there were more prints around, like film or whatever. Like when you're young, like people printed out pictures and whatever, and there were pictures. And he was saying that, we talk about like basically pictures on your phone. You can have an unlimited number of photos on your phone with cloud storage and whatever. He's like, well, what happens when supply goes to infinite? The value goes to zero. He's like, so when printing is now like sort of it requires more to print something in, that generationally now, like Gen Z and Alpha, whatever, really treasure these physical prints because they're not used to it. Like it's not something they've seen before, and they love like the instant cameras for like taking pictures of things and just like having
Polaroids and stuff. Yeah.
Very interestingly, last week my 17-year-old nephew was visiting me, and we were going around New York City, and he had 3 different like automatic, just like the point and shoot, one roll of film cameras, just like he had disposable cameras. He had 3 of them, and like each day we went out in New York City, he'd just take one of these cameras with him and take pictures. And he'd take his. I was like, so why do you do that? And he's like, oh, I don't need to see what it looked like. I'm excited to see when it gets developed. I'm excited to see what I get.
Yeah.
And like what came out. I'm like,
Yep.
Yes. There's sort of, so there's that. I'm hoping that in a sense with AI and the algorithms in general, that there's this sort of backlash on a broader scale of people wanting like, no, I want a real photo. I want to know what a real image is as opposed to something that's manipulated. And I agree with you. I think that there are places for AI. I think that there's definitely places for AI in editing and, like to make the editing process easier, culling your images or whatever. Like that makes, cutting out time so you can spend more time out shooting or doing whatever you need to do, taking some of the busy work out of it as opposed to creating the image itself. I think there's great places that, there's a place for it as a tool. And I think that we maybe overall as a people need to have a better sense of it as a tool and maybe have a little more control over it. So
I think that we as photographers forget that AI has been in our lives for a long time.
Oh yeah.
That, as soon as digital cameras came about, there's AI in a digital camera, firmware, software, editing software. I talk about now. It's like, oh well, we've got AI. It's like, we've had AI for ages. It's just now it's in our face a little bit more, and you can actually create an image from now become this, big hot topic of conversation. But yeah, I think it's important to remind ourselves that it is a tool and it has its place. It's going to have to. We have no choice. So we have to be able to accept that there is going to be a place for it in the image generation sector, as well as all the other things we enjoy AI for, that we're, even talking now from one side of the world to the other. So yeah, again, awareness and just educating yourself about the pros and cons, dangers, pluses, uses.
Critical thinking in general.
Gosh.
As we kind of, as we're, we go so far down this rabbit hole. If we wanted to, I'm going to try to bring us back a little bit. You've had all these experiences, around the world. I think I just mentioned in passing, your Bedouin photos were something that really stuck with me. And as far as like a cultural thing, there's a culture that's disappearing. How? All right, let's rephrase this question. What is one of your, or there were maybe multiple memorable experiences or encounters you've had, and how did it influence your perspective as a photographer and telling stories?
That is an impossible question to answer, but I guess I can kind of draw from my most recent experience. I was in Varanasi, India, about a month ago now, and I consider myself to be a very kind of intermediate when it comes to academia and just general knowledge. Like I don't consider myself ignorant, but I don't consider myself completely versed in just the way of the world in all its intricacies. And I'm not a hugely intelligent person. I'm kind of middle of the ground. And so I went to Varanasi having done my research, and just I'd known about this place for a long time. I've always wanted to go. An opportunity came up, and I was like, right, I'm just going to make it happen. I need to go. So I, classic me, I kind of go in there going, well, I know kind of what I want to shoot. I know about the religious significance of this place and the Ganges and the different types of religious figures there that I want to photograph when it comes to the sadhus and the agoris and these wonderfully evocative types of people. I was like, well, this is going to be a mecca for photography. And as soon as I got that, I'm not sure if you've been to India, but for those that know India, it's just fucking crazy. It's a crazy place. I've been to India a few times, hadn't been to Varanasi. So I was like, well, it's going to be India. We're probably going to get a bit sick. It's going to be hot. It's going to be busy. But this place was insane. Like there's nothing, I don't know how to describe it. Anyway, photography wise, so we had a few kind of ideas planned. We had a fixer there who knew the area very, very well. And so the first morning we were photographing an agori. And agori is a higher positioned sadhu, which a sadhu is a religious Hindu, a devout Hindu who's basically given up everything in life other than his devotion to his gods and his religion. And basically all they do all day is meditate, pray, meditate, pray, meditate, pray. They're kind of an extremely devout religious cohort of people. And a lot of people go there to not to kind of meet them, but to experience these fascinating people
to be in their presence.
Quite indigenous to, a lot of them indigenous to Varanasi. And anyway, the agori are kind of the most respected form of the sadhus, and they are slightly different because they eat human flesh. And now, for those who don't know, kind of the kind of the significance of Varanasi, Varanasi is a place on the Ganges River where many Hindus come to die and to get cremated on the side of the Ganges River, because it's a very holy place, very significant. Going back many, many years, the birth of Hinduism and the Shiva god that they pray to. And so these agoris, they will eat the flesh of the people that die and get kind of thrown into the river. If you can't afford a cremation on the side of the river, you then just kind of get, and it sounds awful, but you just kind of get dumped into the river, which they're happy with, right? They've expressed
that's why they've come there
before they passed away. Exactly. And so the agoris will, I don't know how to put it, not fish them out, but they will, if they come across a dead body in the river, they will eat that flesh. And so, I kind of knew a little bit about this on the first morning, kind of setting up photos with these agori, and he just pulls out a human skull. And I'd kind of seen these photos. It definitely wasn't part of the plan. And he's like, and he just gives me this skull. I'm like, well, I didn't expect this. And these kind of moments like are just so weird and wonderful. And then I'm holding someone's head in my hands, and and we ended up doing some photos with it. I mean, it's hugely powerful, and their belief of what they're doing in terms of reincarnation and why they eat the human flesh. But yeah, that was something that was looking back on it, I should have known that agori, would kind of sometimes carry around skulls and skeletons, but I didn't. And so that surprised me, surprised everyone. And it was definitely an interesting experience. And for the photography aspect, it made, I think, a really interesting photo. So.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's that you're not, you don't know on that level what it's going to be like. Like you think you have an idea, and then you actually get there, and it's different.
Yeah,
when you're actually experiencing it for yourself, that's quite an experience. I don't know how I would react to that. Even it's so. I mean, the thing is, I think that even if you'd been told that was going to happen before you went, it's such an abstract thing to sort of conceptualize beforehand. You're like, oh, sure, whatever. The guy's going to hand me a skull. You're like, what? You're like, okay, all right, that's going to happen. I mean, I'll prepare myself for that. But it's way different when it's, when it's happening, when it's actually happening, and you're sort of like, okay, there's a lot more. I have a lot more questions about this process
Yeah.
then
I think the environment as well adds a little bit. You're standing on the side of the Ganges, and there's so many people and so many sounds and smells, and you realize you're standing on the bank of a river that's got millions of dead bodies in it.
Yeah.
And then this incredible human with all of his decorative clothing and white paint on him, and then doesn't speak any English, obviously, so we're kind of conversing, and then just pulls out, there's actually two skulls, but hands me this one skull. I'm like, what is going on with my life right now? This is so weird. I'm completely grateful and like, this is fantastic, but just very surreal and, like you said, quite abstract. So
yeah, it's so that was your most recent project. Looking ahead, do you have any other projects lined up or goals that you are looking to achieve, or like in your photography? Is there something you're aiming for?
Always thinking about much more now about a cohesive body of work that I can not, I don't like the word legacy, but I can at least kind of focus my mind on when it comes to images, rather than, I used to just go to locations that sparked my interest, meet the people, do a recce, maybe go back again, do the photos, and then that was kind of it. Right? Oh, I got some photos of these people, but I found myself not being satisfied with that, because there's just never enough time to really tell that story. Like you mentioned, the Bedouins of the Middle East. I mean, it was so frustrating, that project. I just didn't have enough time I spent a week trying to find Bedouins, and so that was more of a like, well, now I want to come back and spend even more time, because I can't leave this place without finding these authentic Bedouins. And actually, they're so rare now that it's been so modernized. It makes it more of a challenge. So, you mentioned that, and I think I want to go back and do more of it, or do it better. But now, so I have to kind of, as photographers, I think it's easy to get into the trap of like, I want to take photos of this. I want to take photos. I want to just do loads of photos, right? I want to get up in the morning, pick up my camera, and go and take photos, which is great. But in terms of my work and what I would publicize, I'm looking to a bigger project in Indonesia. So in May, last year I did a kind of an introductory experience where I visited some sea gypsies in Indonesia, who these people used to basically live on the water. For those who've seen Waterworld with Kevin Costner,
yes,
very similar to that. They live in and on the water. They built their own boats, and they're nomadic, so they would travel around Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and there are still quite a few of them around in little pockets of Indonesia. So I went there last year and realized, again, kind of the same thing. It's like, I just need more time to explore. These places are really difficult to get to. By the time you've got there and you kind of, bedding in with these people and they're getting to know you a little bit, it's kind of time to go home. So the Indonesia project is, a multi-year project I want to keep doing. And so each year I'm going to be doing little pockets of it, and kind of hopefully telling a larger story of the diversity of Indonesia as a country, and the diversity of the subcultures within. It's so diverse, both on a geographical standpoint, a historic standpoint, and a cultural standpoint. And even to this day, where there is quite a lot of tourism in certain parts. I'm living on an island that has a lot of tourism, but still there are some wonderful, wonderful large narratives to tell, but more importantly, individual and kind of subgroup narratives and stories to tell here. So that's my kind of overarching goal. And then within that, there are a few projects coming up that I'm looking at. I'd like to go back to India, up to the north of India. There are a few tribes that just no one knows about on the Indonesia Nepal border. So there's that. I'd love to go back to Africa. There's so many kind of stories to tell with tribes that are disappearing there as well. And, and it's kind of a challenge of mine, for a race against time, because we see a lot of these indigenous populations either disappearing or diminishing because everything's just getting modernized, globalized. And that's kind of the battle of the story that I'm trying to tell. So there's a few things in the pipeline, but there's always things that come up as well that I have to try and pounce on if I can.
I think it's kind of in the sense of how you were describing the project, the Indonesia project, is like, having a broader vision, but like paying attention to the threads that sort of weave in and out of that. It's like, you have to know any photographer. Like, I don't know if you're watching this, if you've seen it yet, but the series Nat Geo just put out called Photographer.
Yep.
Highly recommend it. Like, listeners, go watch it. But it shows like how these people, like, there's Dennis Winter, whatever. He's working on a 6-year project for NASA on the Artemis rockets, but he's got all these other projects he's working on. It's sort of like you're balancing all of these different things that are sort of weaving in and out, but also like, oh, what in that project, what are these sort of sub stories amongst that? And I think that, that's it. I don't know. I personally keep telling myself I need to be doing more of that. But it's sort of like the business side of it. Since I'm running the business full time, I'm like, okay, I gotta keep track of that stuff, and then
gets in the way.
Choose that whole making money thing.
Yeah,
is annoying.
But I think I don't think any photographer has to have something like that. I think it's important as photographers, and I teach this and I talk about it a lot on my podcast, is to try and, I mean, this can be applied through any facet of life. Just try and figure out what your purpose with whatever you're doing is, because that will give you direction. And it can take 20 years. It can take 20 minutes. It just and it comes back to the intention. Have an intent, whether that is, I mean, you have a great project that I'm super jealous of. Get a roll of film once a month and go out and shoot and see what the beauty of that is hopefully that you come out with a 12-month book of film that you can look back on and go, I'm really proud of this idea, this project, this concept. And that's not only brought me a beautiful body of work that's meaningful through your parents, but it's also challenged you in a different way and given you a reason to get up and go out with your camera. Yeah. And I think people forget that when they get tied up with the business side of things. Like, well, what am I doing this for? Well, the beauty of it, just to blow your trumpet a little bit more, I love your Instagram page because you don't take photography too seriously. It's great. The amount of before I found you, like, I was miserable, and then I found you on Instagram, and just having that kind of approach to it, I think is wonderful, to not take it too seriously, but have a reason to pick up your camera.
Yeah,
right? Have an intent to go out there and to tell something, and it doesn't have to be telling it for fucking social media. Tell it for yourself. Tell it for your wife. Tell it for your family. Tell it for any reason. It doesn't have to be put out there in the world, right, or to go and get it publicized. Let's go and make a book out of it, or we think so much in these grandiose kind of outputs, but it means so much just doing it for something. And it doesn't have to be anything big. It can just be, in fact, often the more meaningful photographs or mini projects that I've done have been for myself. I'm doing one at the moment, very similar. It's I've stopped posting them because I didn't see the reason to post them, but I'm doing a photo every day for all of this year. And it's like, 90% of them are shit, but I will look back at them and go, oh yeah, I remember that, or I remember why I did that, or, looking at a year of my life in images. I mean, how wonderful that we have the luxury to do that.
Ability. Yeah. The ability to do that. But also, I think, like you said, doing something, if you're intentional about it, doing something with intention every day. I think, like that's a, whatever it is, whether it's photography related or not, that's a good thing to do every day, just to kind of keep yourself grounded and, part of, like, at one with the universe in some way. And I also, thank you very much for kind words about the Instagram feed. I don't like, this is like something that you should feel, you don't take it too seriously. Like, yeah, when you're working for somebody and they've paid you to do a job, great. But there's way too much drama in the photo industry to, like. Hey there, nerdy photo crew. There's one thing you should never be caught without as a professional photographer, and that's a good contract, both for dealing with your clients and dealing with subcontractors that you may work with along the way. Be sure to head over to nerdyphotographer.com and go to our shop and find our contract templates for portrait photography, event photography, wedding photography, as well as dealing with second photographers, associate photographers, and any other subcontractors that you might have. Check it out and keep your business safe. Are you ready to take your website design to the next level? Look no further than Elementor, the cutting-edge WordPress website builder designed for professionals like you. With Elementor, you have the power to create entire website themes and layouts that are as unique as your imagination. Say goodbye to rigid templates and constraints. Elementor empowers you to design custom headers, footers, pages, posts, archive pages, and even WooCommerce product pages, all from a single user-friendly platform. The best part? You don't need to be a coding wizard to use Elementor. Say farewell to the days of wrestling with complex code or being dependent on a myriad of plugins. Elementor offers you a seamless, code-free design experience that puts you in control. So why limit your creativity? Choose Elementor and unleash your website design potential. Elevate your online presence with a website that truly represents your vision and brand. Get started with Elementor today. Just go to nerdyphotographer.com/recommends/Elementor and witness the transformation of your WordPress web design experience. It's time to build an extraordinary website with ease and finesse. Don't wait. Create with Elementor.
Hey. And now for my favorite part of the show. What's that say? Useless information. This is always death.
Matt, before there were dinosaurs, there were fungi. Giant fungi. Do you know how tall some of these fungi used to get? Just out of curiosity, you want to take a guess?
No, but I would, given the way you phrase that question, I imagine very tall. So I'm going to go with 10 meters, about 30
Ooh,
feet,
you're pretty
35
close.
feet.
Yeah, 26 to 30 feet.
Right.
So that's very close to like 10 meters is pretty. Yeah.
Wow.
And 3 feet wide. And they existed approximately 420 to 370 million years ago. Another thing, I think I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but I think you'll find it interesting in the same regards. There were millions of years where trees fell over and didn't rot because the bacteria didn't exist to rot that ate the trees and made them decompose. Didn't exist. So there were literally millions of years where trees would grow, die, fall over, and nothing would happen to it. Like it would just stay there. And then eventually,
Okay, I've got so many questions. How do we know this for a start? How long ago were trees not rotting? And then where did this bacteria come from? Was it human? Was it man-made? Was it animal-made?
No. This is
evolution.
It evolved.
The world?
It evolved because there was food for it. There was all of this plant matter that had not, like, it was just there. And, it evolved to eat and decompose those trees. This is, I can't remember exactly how many millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. But yeah, then it's like this is before there were like large animals on the land masses.
Right.
We had, bacteria and whatever else. And then, eventually more complex animal life came about. But yeah, there were just like millions of years where trees just sat there, and they have found this like basically through like digging where there was. They just found like what is basically tree. I can't think of the word. Fossils. They were just there, laying there.
So when they fell, did they make a sound?
Well, it depends on how you decide on like what's listening. Yeah, it probably makes a sound philosophically. But yeah, and I certainly didn't hear it. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great conversation. I had a lot of fun. Is there anything you want to pitch to our listeners, or anything you got to promote? You're more than welcome to.
No, I'm not a fan of plugging. I'm not a fan of sponsors. I'm not a fan, but I understand the need for them. If people have curiosity, then I will welcome them into my audience. So they can, I'm sure we can link it. But yeah, obviously there's my website and Instagram pages which feature most of my images and podcast clips as well. So more than welcome to go and check that out. And
I will
hopefully I can
include all of those clips all of those links in the episode notes. So if you want to find Matt's work or listen to his podcast, go into the episode notes, click on those links, check it out. Again, Matt, thank you so much for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic.
Maybe that was clearer. Oh, hey, welcome back. The natives were getting a little agitated at one of our attempts at communicating, so we're just adjusting our tactics once again. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Matt Jacob. Be sure to go to the episode notes and check out his work. While you're at it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that already. And please leave a review and or tell a friend about the show. And or, preferably and, but possibly or. You can also follow along on the social medias, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Reddit, at The Nerdy Photo. All one word, no underscores, dots, or dashes, at The Nerdy Photo. Tell us what you think about this or any other episode. Leave your photography-related questions or tell us what topics you'd like to hear about in the future.
I think we should be going.
Are they angry?
No, they appear to be preparing for an elaborate musical number.
Until next time, everybody, stay safe and stay nerdy.
Who's that coming back to town? You better start listening. Who's your heart been beating about? You better listen.